Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Siddiqui, the father of holophase, the local signature of a phi pattern, jets, and finite readability. How a pattern reveals itself in layers, why we only read it to finite depth, and how the first differentiation of phi echoes simultaneously as time, space, and motion. We have now come to a very delicate and beautiful moment in the story. Until now, we have done something radical but careful. We began by saying that pattern is primary, not objects first, not laws first, not observers first, but pattern. Public reality becomes readable only because there is structure that can be compared, tracked, and shared. Then we went deeper and named the primitive root of that possibility. Fa. Not a thing, not a substance, not a field in the ordinary physical sense, not consciousness, not matter. Just the primitive permission for distinction itself, the possibility that this can differ from that. Then we discovered that phi could not be built as an absolute line. It had to be circular. That meant no privileged global zero, no ultimate public origin, no absolute placement that everyone must accept as the truth. Only relation survives publicly. Then we learned that because phi is circular, what becomes public is not absolute phi, but only relations, especially differences, what we write as delta phi, meaning one readable value of phi compared to another. Then we protected the framework against corruption. No hidden assumptions, no undeclared transformations, no smuggled primitives, no confusion between claim types, no collapse between pattern, claim, certificate, and artifact. Then we learned that every public claim comes through a window, a finite access region. No one sees everything. No claim comes from nowhere. Every pattern claim is made through some support, some duration, some resolution, some conditions. Then in part 7, we reached the first readable phase of pattern itself, difference. Before anything can be named, before anything can be interpreted, before anything can be called an object or event, it must first be readable as contrast. Difference is the beginning of legibility. Then in part 8, we faced the first real technical challenge. If phi lives on a circle, how can we read local change? How can we speak of variation in a lawful way when the primitive itself is not a straight line? The answer was by using a lift. A lift is a local unwrapping of circular phi into a locally linear readable form, which we write in text as phi tilde. This local lifted form is not the pattern itself. It is a lawful reading instrument. And once we have a local lift, we can form the first local carrier of change, which we write in text as A equals D phi tilde. This means A is the differential carrier of local change, the first readable local echo of how phi is varying in a neighborhood. And now we arrive at the next question. If we have the first differentiation of phi, if we have begun to read local change through A equals D phi tilde, then how deep does that local readable structure go? Is there only one layer, only value, then rate, and we are done? Or does the local pattern reveal itself in deeper and deeper layers? The answer is, it reveals itself in layers. And those layers are what this part is about. This is the part where we learn that every phi pattern has a local signature, a local fingerprint, a layered readable face, and that we never read all of it completely. We read only to finite depth. In formal language, those layered local signatures are called jets. But do not let the word frighten you. The idea is simple. A jet is just the local fingerprint of a pattern up to some depth. A pattern does not reveal itself all at once. It reveals itself in a ladder. First local presence, then first change, then change of change, then change of that change, and so on. And yet, no matter how deep that ladder could in principle go, we only ever certify it to a finite level. That is the humility at the heart of part 9. A pattern has depth. Imagine placing your hand on a stone. At first, you know only that it is there. Stay a little longer and you notice that it is cool. Move your fingers and you notice that one part is smooth, another part rough. Move further and you feel that the surface slopes. Move a little more and you notice that the slope itself changes. It becomes more curved. Then you notice a groove, then a crack, then a change in grain, then a small ridge. What is happening? The stone is not being created one layer at a time. The stone was always there in its full structure. What changes is your readability of it. The stone reveals itself to you in layers. This is the central intuition of part 9. A pattern has more local structure than is visible at first contact. It has depth. You do not first read everything, you first read what your window allows. The same is true for a melody. At first, you hear only that a note is present. Then you hear whether it is rising or falling. Then you hear how that rise itself bends. Then you hear the texture in the tone. Then you hear subtle tremor, attack, resonance, and overtone structure. Again, the music was always that rich, but your local readable access deepens layer by layer. That is what jets formalize. 2. The derivative ladder begins with the first differentiation of phi star. Now, let us speak directly about the derivative ladder. This is where your requested emphasis becomes essential. The entire local ladder begins when phi is first differentiated through a lawful local lift. We start with the circular pattern phi. Because phi is circle valued, we cannot simply differentiate it globally as though it lived on a straight line. That would ignore the circular structure and silently smuggle in linear absolutism. So we first choose a lawful local lift, phi tilde, in a neighborhood. Then the first differentiation becomes possible. We write this in text as A equals d phi tilde. This is the first carrier of local change. It tells us the pattern is not only there, it is varying. Now, here is the deep point you asked to foreground. The first differentiation of phi is not merely one local mathematical move. It is the first moment where the pattern begins to echo simultaneously in what later become readable as time-like change, space-like variation, and motion-like relation. At this stage, we must be very disciplined. We are not yet saying that time, space, and motion are primitive separate things. We are saying something more subtle and more profound. The first differentiation of phi produces a local carrier whose readable aspects later echo as time, space, and motion. That means the derivative ladder does not start with three separate substances. It starts with one underlying differentiated pattern carrier, and that carrier can later be read in coordinated ways. So the first differentiation is already a kind of tri-echo. It is not yet the full doctrine of time, space, and motion as readouts. That belongs more fully to part 10, but the seeds are already here. When local change first becomes readable through A equals d phi tilde, the pattern begins to show. Sequence-like aspect, spread-like aspect, directional flow-like aspect. These are the earliest echoes of what later become cadence, texture, and flow. So the derivative ladder begins here, not with three worlds, but with one differentiated local pattern whose first readable echo already contains the seeds of all three. 3. Local structure comes in layers. Once the first differentiation is available, local pattern behavior does not stop there. A pattern in a neighborhood can be read in layers. First layer, local phase. What is the local pattern like here? At the simplest level, this is the immediate local character, the pattern's local presence or local value-like behavior in the neighborhood. Second layer, first change. How is it changing here? This is where A equals d phi tilde lives. The pattern now has a first local derivative-like signature. Third layer, change of change. How is the first change itself changing? This is the beginning of local curvature-like structure. Not merely it changes, but its change bends, steepens, flattens, twists, or modulates. Fourth layer and beyond. How does that curvature itself vary? How does that higher variation itself shift? And so on. This is the local derivative ladder. If you want a very human analogy, think of a car on a road. First, where is the car? Second, how fast is it moving? Third, how is that speed changing? Fourth, how is that acceleration itself changing? Or think of emotion. First, you feel sad, then sadness intensifies. Then that intensification slows. Then a new turn begins. Reality at the local level is often layered like this. The ladder does not stop because reality does not stop being subtle just because our first reading stops. 4. Jets, the local fingerprint of a pattern. Now we can introduce the formal word. These layered local signatures are called jets. A jet is the local fingerprint of a pattern up to a certain depth. If we say kjet, we mean the local pattern information readable up to order k. In simple terms, the 0 jet captures the most immediate local phase. The 1 jet includes first local change, the 2 jet includes curvature-like behavior, the 3 jet includes the next layer, and so on. You can think of jets as the local signature stack of a pattern. A fingerprint is a good analogy. From far away, you may see only that a fingerprint exists. Closer, you see ridges. Closer still, you see how the ridges curve. Closer still, you see tiny bifurcations and endings. Closer still, finer surface texture. At each level, the local identity becomes richer. A jet is like that, except generalized to any local pattern. It tells us how the pattern behaves here, up to a declared depth. This is why jets matter. Without them, local structure stays vague. With them, local structure becomes disciplined. 5. Jets are not the whole pattern. This must be said with absolute clarity. A jet is not the pattern itself. A jet is the local readout of a pattern. It is the local face, the local fingerprint, the local readable stack, but it is not the whole pattern. Why is this so important? Because one of the easiest mistakes in science is to confuse what can currently be read with what fully exists. A local signature, even a rich one, is still local. A finite order readout, even a deep one, is still finite. A pattern may share a given local jet with another pattern and still differ globally. Two melodies may open the same way and diverge later. Two landscapes may have the same local slope and curvature, but belong to utterly different terrains. Two people may have similar first reactions, but different, deeper structures of character. So jets are powerful, but limited. They are enough to support many kinds of local claims, but they are never the whole. This protects us from false totality. Why jets become necessary after ASAR Part 8 gave us the first local carrier? A equals D phi tilde. That was the first major breakthrough in local readability. It gave us the first local expression of change. But once that exists, a new question immediately arises. How does ASAR itself behave locally? Does it remain steady? Does it bend? Does it strengthen? Does it change its own pattern of change? In other words, once first order local change is readable, higher local layering becomes possible. That is where jets enter. Jets do not replace A, they deepen what A opened. You can think of it like this. Part 7 gave us difference. Part 8 gave us first local change. Part 9 now gives us the layered local fingerprint built above that first change. So part 9 is the natural continuation of the derivative ladder. 7. The first differentiation echoes in time, space, and motion. Now let us develop the point you asked to emphasize. The first differentiation of phi does not merely produce a technical local object. It produces the first differentiated local pattern carrier whose readable aspects later echo in 3 simultaneous ways. When A equals d phi tilde becomes available, it is already the seed of time-like echo. The pattern now has readable cadence-like variation. There is now such a thing as before versus after in local pattern behavior. Not because time has been inserted as a primitive, but because local differentiated sequence has become readable. Space-like echo. The pattern now has readable spread-like variation. One nearby region differs from another. Texture-like local relation appears. Motion-like echo. The pattern now has readable directional flow-like relation. Not merely static difference, but change that can be read as directed local passage. These are not 3 independent substances. They are 3 coordinated echoes of one differentiated local pattern structure. So when we later speak of time, space, and motion as readouts, we will not be inventing them from nowhere. Their seeds are already here in the first differentiation of phi. The derivative ladder is therefore not just a ladder of abstract local orders. It is the first place where the familiar world begins to reappear, but now as readout rather than primitive assumption. That is one of the deepest inversions in the whole framework. Finite readability. We never certify infinite local detail. Now we arrive at the second great law of this part. In principle, local structure can be indefinitely rich, but public readability is always finite. This means we do not certify an infinite jet. We do not certify total local depth. We do not certify everything that may be there in principle. We certify only what can be read within a declared window up to a declared depth, with declared uncertainty and support. This is the finite readability principle. It protects science from pretending that current access equals total local knowledge. A microscope may read one local layer. A stronger microscope may read more. A new algorithm may reveal another order. A longer observation may stabilize another layer. There is always more that might lie beneath present access. So finite readability is not a confession of failure. It is the honesty that keeps inquiry alive. Readability ceilings. Different windows support different local depths. Some windows can barely support the simplest local phase. Others can support first change. Others can support curvature-like reading. Others can sustain deeper local orders. So each window has what we may call a readability ceiling. In text form, we can write this conceptually as n max of W, meaning the maximum readable local order supported by window W. That is not a mystical formula. It just says every access window has a ceiling beyond which local claims become uncertifiable. A blurry image cannot support fine derivative claims. A short, noisy time series cannot support deep local jet claims. Sparse data cannot justify high-order local signature claims. Weak calibration cannot sustain delicate local curvature estimates. This idea is revolutionary in its humility. It says, do not claim deeper local structure than your window can actually lawfully sustain. That is what protects the framework from local fantasy. 10. Examples of local depth. A rolling ball. You can see where the ball is. Maybe you can estimate its speed. Maybe with better access, you estimate acceleration. But beyond that, your data may become too weak. The ball's motion has richer local structure than your current window can certify. A musical note. You hear pitch first, then timbre, then attack, then microtexture, then maybe subtle modulation. The note has depth. Your ear reads only part of it. A coastline. From orbit, you see the broad outline. Closer, the cliffs and bays. Closer, rocks and sand textures. Closer, grain patterns. Closer, crystal surfaces. The coastline is layered. Every window reads only to some depth. A human face. From afar, you see face, not face. Closer, expression. Closer, muscle tension. Closer, micro-expressions. Closer still, fatigue traces, asymmetries, and texture. Again, local depth exists beyond what one glance can read. 11. Jets support identity, but only locally and within scope. Jets can help us say whether two local pattern neighborhoods are the same up to some order. For example, two local regions may have the same immediate local face, the same first-order change, the same curvature-like structure, but differ at higher order. So we can say they agree locally up to some jet depth. This is powerful for identity claims, but there are two great cautions. First caution, local is not global. Two patterns may share the same local signature at a point and differ elsewhere. Second caution, finite order is not infinite order. Two patterns may match up to order k and differ at order k plus 1. So jets support identity claims only under declared local scope and declared read depth. This is why Part 9 strengthens rigor rather than weakening it. It gives us a more precise language for sameness without pretending that local sameness is total sameness. 12. There is always more beneath current reach. This may be the deepest sentence in the whole chapter. There is always more beneath current reach. That is not a slogan. It is the philosophical core of finite readability. Whatever local signature you certify, there may be finer structure beneath, deeper order beneath, hidden subtlety beneath, unread layers beneath. That does not make current knowledge worthless. It makes it honest. Science becomes false when it confuses accessible depth with total depth. Part 9 prevents that confusion. So the proper attitude becomes read as deeply as the window lawfully permits. State that depth clearly. State the uncertainty clearly. Do not pretend that current access exhausts local reality. That is the maturity of this framework. The read depth or derivative ceiling gate. Now we can state the next gate. Read depth gate, also called the derivative ceiling gate. This gate asks, what local jet order is being claimed? What window supports that claim? Is the support, resolution, sampling, and uncertainty sufficient for that order? Has the readability ceiling been respected? If not, the claim fails. This gate exists because it is very easy to speak as though one has read deeper than one truly has. People regularly claim smoothness without support, curvature without enough data, higher order structure from sparse points, deep local signatures from weak windows. The gate stops this. Every higher order local claim must declare attempted jet order, estimability, support sufficiency, uncertainty, and scope. Without those, certification is refused. 14. Firewalls installed in Part 9. Part 9 blocks several subtle corruptions. No infinite smoothness assumptions without declaration. Do not assume the pattern is readable to all orders unless that is explicitly licensed. No pretending higher order jets are certified. If the data only supports lower order structure, do not claim higher order local depth. No local to global collapse. A local jet is not the whole pattern. No finite read depth as total knowledge. Certified depth does not equal complete pattern reality. These firewalls are some of the most important humility protections in the system. 15. Why Part 9 matters for what comes next. Now the next step becomes possible. Once a local signature is layered, we can ask, how do the familiar major phases of experience emerge from one and the same local differentiated carrier? How can the same local signature echo as cadence, texture, flow, which later become readable as time, space, motion? That is the natural handoff to Part 10. Because Part 10 will not invent time, space, and motion as primitives. It will show how they can be read from one underlying differentiated local pattern structure. And Part 9 is what makes that move lawful. A phi pattern has a local signature. That local signature is layered. Local phase, first change, curvature-like change, higher order local variation, and beyond. These layered local fingerprints are called jets. A jet is not the whole pattern. It is the pattern's local readable phase up to some finite depth. Public science never certifies infinite local detail. It certifies only finite depth local structure within the limits of a declared window. Every window, therefore, has a readability ceiling. There is always more beneath current reach. And the first differentiation of phi through A equals d phi tilde already begins to echo simultaneously in the three great local phases that later emerge as time, space, and motion. That is why Part 9 is so important. It teaches us that local reality is rich, that our access to it is finite, and that honesty about that finite depth is the beginning of real wisdom. Always, peace be upon you.